A loud thud echoed through the valley. The old farmer stood at the edge of the dry well, peering into the darkness below. His heart raced as he realized what had happened. His donkey, the only one he had slipped and fallen in. The sun beat down mercilessly on the parched land. It hadn't rained in months. The once flourishing fields were now cracked and lifeless. The well, once the lifeline of the farm, had dried up and been left unused for years. The farmer had meant to cover it. But he never found the time, or the money. Now, the donkey was trapped at the bottom, barely visible in the shadowy pit. It cried out, loud and pained, its brays filled with fear. The old man's heart broke. That donkey had carried his burdens for years, plowed the fields, carried harvests, and even walked miles to fetch water during the worst droughts. But now, there was no way to bring it back up. The well was deep, the walls steep and unforgiving. The farmer didn't have the tools or strength to pull it out. His neighbors were too far, and time was too short. The donkey was hurt. Every cry was getting weaker. He made the hardest decision of his life. He decided to bury it alive. He couldn't bear the thought of the poor animal starving and suffering slowly. If it had to die, at least it should be quick and painless. So, with a heavy heart, he began to shovel dirt into the well. One scoop at a time. He tried not to listen to the donkey's cries. Every thud of the shovel was like thunder in his ears. With each layer of dirt, the sound grew fainter. But something strange happened. After the first few shovels, he heard a new sound. It wasn't a cry. It was movement. The farmer paused. He leaned in and looked. The donkey was shaking off the dirt. Again and again, each time a shovel of dirt landed on its back, the donkey would shake it off and take a step up. Shake it off. Step up. The farmer's eyes widened. He kept going, now with a new purpose. Every time the dirt fell, the donkey used it to climb. Slowly, steadily, unbelievably, the donkey was rising. From helplessly trapped, to stubbornly surviving. The sun began to set, casting golden light over the field. And just as the last shovel of dirt was thrown, the donkey stepped out of the well, dusty, exhausted, but alive. The farmer fell to his knees, overwhelmed with emotion. He had tried to bury it, but the donkey didn't give up. And in that moment, the man understood something that he would never forget, something that would change how he saw every hardship in life. But the real lesson was still to come. The next morning, the village was buzzing. News of the donkey that climbed out of a deep, abandoned well had spread fast. Some came to mock the old man for thinking of burying his own animal, while others came in disbelief, just to see the donkey with their own eyes. Children pointed at it with wide eyes, elders nodded silently, impressed by its willpower. But the donkey? It stood quietly, munching on dry grass near the well, the very hole that was supposed to be its grave. The old farmer couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The donkey had been ridden off, assumed defeated, but it had taken each shovel of dirt and turned it into a step. And now, the farmer saw life differently. But life, it seemed, wasn't done testing him. A week later, dark clouds gathered above the village for the first time in months. Rain fell, heavy and wild. The fields soaked in every drop like thirsty mouths. The villagers rejoiced, dancing in the rain, children splashing in muddy puddles, women collecting water in buckets. But deep in the valley, water began pouring into the broken edges of the dried land, turning everything soft and unstable. By midnight, a landslide had hit the old farmer's land. The shed collapsed. Tools and grains were swept away in thick mud. The fence around the field was broken. And the donkey, it was gone. The farmer, panicked, lit a torch and wandered into the night. Mud soaked his clothes. His feet slipped every few steps. But he kept calling, "Shabu! Shabu!" The name he'd given the donkey years ago when he first found it as a lost, abandoned creature on the edge of the forest. Hours passed. No sign. Then, a sound. A faint bray from somewhere far. The farmer followed it, stumbling through the mess of fallen trees and scattered stones. His torch flickered as the wind howled louder. The sound came again, clearer this time. He rushed forward and found the donkey stuck halfway under a fallen tree, its legs covered in wet, thick mud. But its eyes, those stubborn, steady eyes, still burned with life. The farmer dropped the torch and ran to it. He dug with his bare hands. Every scoop of mud brought back memories of that day at the well, only this time, he wasn't throwing dirt in, he was pulling it out. It took over an hour. His hands bled. His clothes were ruined. His knees were shaking. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Because if the donkey didn't give up when buried alive, how could he? Finally, with one last push, the donkey freed its leg and stood up, wobbling but upright. The farmer collapsed next to it, laughing and crying at once. In that moment, he understood the second lesson. Life doesn't test you just once. It throws dirt on you again and again. Sometimes, it's a shovel. Sometimes, it's a storm. But you always have a choice: get buried under it, or use it as a step. And this donkey? It was becoming more than just a survivor. It was a teacher. The storm had passed, but its destruction lingered for days. The old farmer's land looked like it had aged 100 years overnight. Crops were ruined. The shed lay in pieces. And yet, through the center of the chaos, the donkey walked, slower than before, limping slightly, but walking. Alive. Word of the donkey's second survival spread again, this time reaching beyond the village. A curious man in a brown coat arrived from a nearby town. He introduced himself as a writer and said he'd heard a strange but beautiful tale about a donkey that had taught a village a lesson. The farmer welcomed him in. They sat outside, under the morning sun, drinking tea while the donkey grazed in the distance. "He's not just a donkey," the farmer said, quietly. "He's me. He's everyone. He carries what we all carry, weight, dirt, pain, but keeps moving forward." The writer stayed for 2 days, jotting notes, watching the animal, listening to the villagers talk. By the time he left, the story was already forming in his head. But life, true to its ways, wasn't done with the donkey. A few weeks later, a group of men came to the village with a truck. They were from the city, dressed in clean shirts and leather shoes. They told the farmer that they'd heard about the donkey, and they wanted to buy it. Not for labor or farm work. For inspiration. "You see," one of them said, "we're building a motivation center in the city. A place where people come to hear stories of survival. We want to show them something real, not a speech or a video, but this donkey. The real symbol of never giving up." They offered money. A lot of it. More than the farmer had seen in his entire life. The villagers gathered around. Some nodded at the offer. "It's just a donkey," one man whispered. "He's old. Let him live well." But the farmer didn't reply immediately. He looked at the donkey, standing calmly by the old tree. He thought about the well, the mudslide, the bleeding hands, the sleepless nights. This animal wasn't just a creature. It was a companion. A symbol. A reminder of everything he'd endured. He bent down, picked up a handful of dust, and let it fall through his fingers. Then he looked up. "He's not for sale," the farmer said softly, yet firmly. The men tried to persuade him. "We'll care for him. He'll be fed better. He'll have shelter." But the farmer shook his head. "He's already where he belongs. He doesn't need a fancy stage to inspire people. He just needs to be seen, right here, as he is." The men left, disappointed. But the villagers clapped. The story of the donkey had gained a new chapter, not of survival alone, but of integrity. Of choosing meaning over money. Of staying true when tempted to let go. That evening, a group of children came to the farm. They sat in a circle as the old farmer told them the story, not as a tale of an animal, but as a reflection of themselves. You will all have your moments, he said. When life throws dirt on you. When people try to sell your worth. Just remember, you get to decide if you'll sink, or step up. The donkey stood nearby, quiet and proud. Years passed, but the story of the donkey never faded. The village had changed, roads were smoother, electricity hummed through wires, and cell phones buzzed in the hands of even the youngest children. But one thing remained constant, the donkey. His once dark coat had turned gray with age, and his steps had grown slower, but his presence still commanded quiet respect. He had become more than a donkey, he was a living symbol. Travelers would come from nearby villages, schools, and towns just to see him. Some came curious. Others came broken, searching for something they couldn't explain. They would sit near the farm, looking at the animal that had survived being buried, had stood still in a mudslide, and had rejected the bright lights of the city, not by speaking, but by simply being. The farmer, now older and more bent than before, never tired of telling the story. But one winter morning, the village awoke to an unfamiliar silence. The donkey didn't rise. He lay peacefully under his favorite tree, eyes closed, body still. No signs of pain, no signs of fear. Just peace, as if he knew his story had reached its final page. Word spread quickly. People arrived in quiet waves, not in panic, but in reverence. Children placed small flowers near him. Grown men wiped away tears. And the old farmer stood beside his lifelong companion, eyes red but heart proud. He didn't make noise, the farmer whispered. He didn't fight or run or beg. But he won. Every single day. They buried the donkey near the well, the same one he had once escaped. A wooden sign was placed there with simple words carved into it. Buried. Beaten. But never broken. The story of the donkey was no longer just a village tale. A teacher who had once visited wrote about him in her classroom, calling it the tale of hope in silence. A university professor turned the story into a speech about resilience. And the writer who once visited published a short book, The Donkey Who Didn't Give Up. It became a quiet sensation, not because it was loud, but because it was real. People began to see themselves in the donkey. A young girl bullied in school read the story and said, "If the donkey didn't quit, why should I?" A man who lost his job found it, and it made him start again. An old woman in a hospital kept a copy beside her bed, saying, "He reminds me that I still have worth." The donkey had never spoken a word. He hadn't given interviews, or worn medals. But his life, in its raw and quiet truth, shouted a message louder than any speech. You can be buried in pain. You can be dragged through storms. You can be overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated. But if you don't give up, you win. That was his silent victory. And in every heart that heard his story, a seed of strength was planted. The kind that whispers during our darkest days,